or introduce up to 50% renewables by 2030. And what are we doing in terms of that? Last year in 2024, the generation procurement entity awarded 100 megawatts of renewables, and the next tranche is coming up. What are we doing in terms of the transportation side? Under the electric vehicle policy, we're aiming to electrify the government fleet, aiming to electrify public transport, and also their targets for private vehicles. In terms of this front, Wigton has an associate Flash Vehicles that supplies 100% electric vehicle pickups. Another area affecting the bills is losses. We all hear about this. Statistics from the JPS report 2023 show 27.86% losses. So almost a third of what is produced is lost, and almost 70% of that is theft. So now there are lots of programs, but obviously that's a big area we need to tackle. So one area to avoid these losses is if you generate it at your site, you wouldn't have any distribution system losses. So we're all, there are many programs to advocate for this in terms of commercial and residential. You can get some benefits under the net billing programs and also tax incentives. I'll try and pick up the pace. In terms of generation at the site, you can typically save between 20 and 50%, but it all depends on your space to implement solar. Now Wigton has rebranded from Wigton Wind Farm. We were largely in wind, but now we're called Wigton Energy because we're branching out into solar. And in particular, we're the largest wind farm currently, largest renewable energy provider in Jamaica at 62.7 megawatts. We're providing about 6% of the energy generation. Renewables are about 18%. Wigton is 33% of the renewables capacity in Jamaica. We will still also be the largest IPP, which is independent power producer in 2 years, because we were recently awarded a 49.83 megawatt solar project, and we're repowering our initial phase 1 20-year-old plant with solar. It would be remiss not to talk about the other benefits of renewables. I heard drill baby drill, but we should still also factor other things such as climate change and sustainable development, the stability that renewables provides versus the volatility of fossil fuel pricing, and also public health benefits when you don't burn fossil fuels. And that's it for me, thanks.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We now call on Mr. Hugh Grant, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited, to make his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm quite mindful that we're between you and the end of this great conference, so I'll be very, very brief. Let's give a round of applause to Michelle. So as we think about energy, I just want to share a few nuggets with you from my perspective. Quite mindful of the share of the wallet that energy is here in Jamaica. I understand it and I get it. With that also, I'm quite mindful that the industry is going through a very exciting transition. The transition from fossil fuel to renewables. This is a global transition. As we think global, I frankly think there are lots of opportunities for Jamaica to learn from the trends and what has transpired globally, so that we don't make some of those very same mistakes. Because the reality is, as an island, we don't get a second chance. We have to get it right, and we have to get it right the first time. So I'm going to share 3 nuggets with you, and then I'll hand over to Charlie. 1, I want you to, as you think about energy, you think about scale. With scale comes competitive prices. The reality is, here in Jamaica, our peak load is just under 700 megawatts. That's really not a lot of power when you think about some of the larger utilities. Big here in the Caribbean, but in New York, where I recently came from to assume this position, I would have 1 plant that's 1,000 megawatts. Here in Jamaica, 700 megawatts is the entire system. The lack of scale presents lack of leverage for competitive prices. So there's an opportunity for us to think as a collective here in the Caribbean, and what do we look like as a potential block to potentially get better prices in terms of some of the sources of fuel. I heard conversations earlier around CARICOM as a block as it relates to the financial sector. I'm on the board of a group called CARILEC, which is a Caribbean Utilities Corporation, over 30 utilities in the Caribbean, and we're also thinking along the veins of what can we do to present ourselves as a block. That's one. Secondly, we have to think about the sources of energy. Michelle spoke eloquently about the various sources of energy. But as we think about the sources of energy in terms of fossil-based plants, which is liquefied natural gas, heavy fuel oil, or alternative diesel oil, we have to think of the notion of intermittent sources and dispatchable sources. Because the overarching thing, as you think about sources, you have to think about reliability and you have to think about resiliency. We all recently experienced Hurricane Beryl. And Hurricane Beryl taught us what it means to be resilient, reliable, or lack thereof. And frankly, with the advent of climate change, what we're seeing globally is more frequent, more severe, and longer duration adverse weather. So as we think about our energy mix, frankly, I think there's a lot of rhetoric around our energy mix, but I'm here to speak to you from a factual, objective, and realistic perspective. And we have to overarch that with the underpinning components of resiliency and reliability. The final thing I will share with you is this, and Michelle touched on it. We here in Jamaica, as we think about energy costs, about 20% of the costs, and what we're seeing is theft and lost revenues. That is an issue that we also have to address. The good thing is, we're on the way in doing so, partnering with key stakeholders such as the regulator and government. But that is not only a financial issue, it's a socio-economic issue. Frankly, we heard other socio-economic issues in terms of the STAR program and other things that's being done. We need to also unlock those opportunities so we can get to the bottom line of that, and that would also help in terms of the overarching energy prices. I've shared a few things. I look forward to our continued engagement. Frankly, I'm also very encouraged by the level of attentiveness of you all at this late hour in the evening and the conference. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Hugh. We now call on Mr. Charles Chambers, the Director and Chief Executive Officer of West Indies Petroleum Company, to make his presentation.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Moderator, fellow panelists, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. The cost of energy fundamentally shapes how resources are deployed across the Caribbean economies. It drives investment decisions, influences infrastructure development, and ultimately determines the very lives that we lead. Energy represents the highest cost in our day-to-day lives, impacting everything from food preparation to transportation, manufacturing, and essential services. Let me be direct. The reality we face today is stark. Jamaicans pay $6 per gallon for fuel, while US consumers pay $2 to $2.50. Our electricity costs are around 49 cents per kilowatt hour, compared to 4 cents in places like Kingston. These are not just numbers, but they represent a fundamental barrier to our region's competitiveness and our people's prosperity. Further, this difference in energy cost drives how we must deploy our resources and infrastructure. The core drivers of these high energy costs are clear. First, infrastructure. We have inherited and continue to use infrastructure that wasn't designed for today's Jamaica. This ad hoc approach to energy infrastructure has left us with systems that drive up costs rather than create efficiencies. Second, our tax structure. Currently, fuel carries a 60% tax burden that passes directly to consumers. This isn't just about fuel at the pump. It cascades through our entire economy, affecting food prices, transportation, manufacturing, and the basic cost of living for every Jamaican. Third, our fragmented regional approach. Despite having significant storage capacity across the Caribbean, 32 million barrels of storage in St. Croix, 16 in the Bahamas, 12 million in St. Eustatius, and significant capacity in Curacao, Trinidad, and Aruba, we have failed as our region to leverage these assets effectively for regional benefit. At West Indies Petroleum, we understand these challenges intimately. Our deployment decisions are driven by the imperative to reduce energy costs. I'd like to share some of the concrete examples from our experience. First, strategic infrastructure deployment. We've invested in over 850,000 barrels of storage capacity across carefully chosen locations. The deployment allows us to achieve economies of scale and help Jamaica to lessen price fluctuations. The locations weren't chosen by chance. They were driven by the need to optimize logistics costs and improve accessibility. Second, operational deployment. We have extended our operational hours from 3 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 days per week, and achieved 45-minute terminal turnaround times. These deployment decisions were driven by the need to reduce operational costs for our customers, particularly for manufacturers and transportation companies who need reliable, cost-effective access to fuel. Third, market deployment. By supporting independent operators, we've helped democratize and nationalize access to fuel. Today, we supply approximately 80% of Jamaica's independent gas stations. This deployment strategy was driven by the need to create market competition and improve accessibility, particularly in underserved areas. However, reducing the Caribbean's energy bill requires a broader approach. The deployment of resources must be coordinated regionally to achieve maximum efficiency. We need strategic infrastructure development. We must stop treating infrastructure as an afterthought. We are waterborne states, and so logistics are incredibly important and have a huge impact on cost. The scale of thinking that we need to do is how to create deep water ports so that we can bring huge ships full of fuel from near or far, so that on our island, we bring the fuel here at the lowest possible cost. Think about how CMA CGM was able to invest $300 million to dredge Kingston Harbour from 12 meters to 15 meters. So that today we can receive Panamax vessels in Kingston Harbour. And think about Kingston Harbour, how it's flourishing, and how CMA CGM thinks about that investment as part of a global logistics hub. Tax reform and incentives. The current tax on fuel is unsustainable. We need to incentivize investment in energy infrastructure through tax policies that benefit local companies and encourage partnerships with international expertise. This isn't about giving away revenue. It's about strategic investment in our future. Support our local companies, companies that are led and managed by Jamaicans who live here. That will build wealth here and reinvest here, creating wealth for our people and building a stronger country. We need public-private partnerships. The solution lies not in government-built infrastructure, which historically proves expensive and inefficient. We need PPPs and development and deployment structured by government policy and executed by Caribbean countries which have a vested interest in our region's success. The harsh reality is this: our current energy costs are suffocating economic growth. We need a comprehensive, deliberate, collaborative, and decisive public-private partnership approach to energy infrastructure. There are literally trillions of dollars in global infrastructure funds seeking reliable, long-term returns. We have the opportunity to tap into this capital, but we must do it strategically and with local companies and Caribbean interests at the forefront. The solution requires a fundamental rethinking of how we deploy energy infrastructure across the Caribbean and across the region. This isn't just about low energy costs. It's about creating a foundation for genuine economic development and prosperity for our people and for the future. At West Indies Petroleum, we have demonstrated that in our own space what's possible. In just a decade, we have built significant storage capacity, improved distribution efficiency, and helped bring more competition to the market. But individual company success isn't enough. We need systemic change. So let me be clear. Without addressing these fundamental issues, particularly infrastructure and tax policy, we will continue to handicap our region's development. We now need to take measured and informed action. And most importantly, we should do this collectively and through structures that make it an imperative that the participants are from and exist within this region. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Charles. That's a very solid presentation. We have been making that point for a long time. Running large primary surpluses at the expense of a country's infrastructure. You can't grow without investing in infrastructure. Productivity is driven by the productivity of labor, the productivity of capital, and the residual that we call infrastructure. The country's infrastructure is rotting. Well, I've said enough. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now your segment of the show. Please identify yourself and be concise with your questions. Don't make statements, and identify the panelists we want to answer the question. It's not your show.
Derek Tulloch, and I'd like to ask Mr. Newbrand, is nuclear power feasible in the generation mix? If you could elaborate from it, Jamaica.
No, thank you. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. So as I mentioned earlier, you have renewables as one source of energy, and then you also have thermals or nuclear, which is another source of energy. Renewables by nature are intermittent, they are non-dispatchable, so renewables alone is not the solution to an energy future that's going to deliver to this great nation. Renewables with storage in terms of batteries is a potential solution. However, the reality is you need long duration storage. And when I say long duration storage, currently with the technology, the longest you're getting out of storage is 4 to 8 hours. That is not enough to deliver on a resilient, reliable grid. So absent of continual development in terms of the renewable and storage place, to deliver on a reliable, resilient grid, we now have to look at what are the dispatchable resources that we have. I mentioned 2, thermal or nuclear. That's what we have right now, and that's what's proven. However, there is research ongoing in terms of some other low carbon emissions alternatives, such as hydrogen blend or hydrogen, to potentially replace some of the other thermal sources that we have. So I would say this: renewable is a proven technology in many places. Renewable is also a low carbon, affordable solution. That is a fact. However, I'm quite mindful that there are some safety risks and environmental risks associated in terms of nuclear. Based on that, you have the development of multiple technologies, SMRs, small modular reactors. That technology continues to evolve and continues to be developed. So I would say, as the Prime Minister said on Tuesday evening, we can't afford to close the door on nuclear. However, we have to make sure that given the size of Jamaica, given the potential risk, that we do our due diligence around compliance, around maintenance, around the technologies, and ensure that it's proven before we think of any adaptation in terms of that. But the reality is nuclear is proven in many places. Many places it has been going and going for several years. In New York, where I was prior to here, we had 2,000 megawatts of nuclear in Westchester, a highly residential neighborhood, without issues. And it provided affordable, dispatchable energy. Mindful, this is Jamaica, things are a bit different. But from my perspective, I align with what the Prime Minister has said, that we can't close the door on nuclear. The technology, frankly, for small modular reactors is 10, 20 years out. So we'll continue to engage. We'll continue to play actively in the space with leaders to learn more, ensure that the safeguards are in place, and then we see where we go from there. Hopefully that answered the question. Thanks for that question.
Hi, Ralston. Hi, Mr. Grant. Have you looked at the issue of water pumped uphill as a storage source using renewable energy? There's been a few ideas around this for some time. I'm not sure how feasible it is, but I know it's obviously done in other countries. That would be the main one. And in your view, hydrogen, I believe there's various French companies that are trying to do this across the region. Maybe you have a further update as to where you think it is. Is it 5 years out? Is it 10 years out? How feasible is it?
No, thanks. Thanks for that question. I'll start.